from Democracy at Work with another Wolff responds. I want to talk about the meaning of the Trump 4 years now that they are over. I think there are crucial lessons to draw, lessons that we must draw, or else we're going to produce more Trumps, worse Trumps in the years ahead. I want to title this talk by a phrase. Trump did not bring fascism to the United States. It was fascism in the United States that found Trump. He was a tool for it, not the other way around. What do I mean by such a title? Capitalism in the United States has always produced opposites. It is a system of opposites. Or as one of its greatest critics said, it is a self-contradictory system. It's full of these kinds of contradictions. So, for example, it is very effective in producing wealth. Capitalism has shown that. But what is perhaps less well understood is that the system is equally remarkably capable of reproducing poverty. We have had poverty alongside of wealth as the signature of capitalism in the United States. Just as we do today, just as we did 20, 40, 80, 100, 200 years ago. The system produces inequality and all of the contradictions that go with that. But the system also produces another kind of contradiction. It's the contradiction between those who celebrate it and those who criticize it. Those who want to go beyond capitalism and those who want, no matter what the cost, to save it, to preserve it. And it's that I want to talk about. When capitalism, as it always has, reaches another one of its periodic crises, when its internal contradictions and oppositions explode, you know, like they did at the beginning of this century with the so-called dot-com crisis and all that was involved with that, as it did again in the crisis of 2008, as it did again in 2020 with the combined crises of a capitalist depression and a public health disaster. These kinds of crises and others bring to the fore a very profound contradiction, and therein lies the lesson of the Trump period. The contradiction is between those who feel, rightly and wrongly, both that they are victims of capitalism, that they are thrown aside, under-respected, impoverished, discriminated against, and they are in the millions, find the level of their exploitation, oppression, unbearable, and begin to rebel, to turn against the system. Some more, some less. Some aware that the system is their problem, many of them thinking it's something else and wondering what it is. And then a remarkable thing happens. The victims discover the critics. The critics were always there, but they didn't have much of an audience. They weren't listened to. They were shunted aside. They were silenced. But now, in crisis times, the victims discover the critics discover the audience they have in the victims. And a movement to change, to challenge the system emerges. That's one side of the contradiction. But there's another side. The side that does not want to give up on capitalism, that has associated itself, rightly, wrongly, one way or another, with capitalism, it wants to save capitalism, not to go beyond it. And one of the ways, not the only one, but one of the ways that a capitalism in trouble saves itself is by making adjustments to which we give the name fascism. What are these? Well, they're very simple, basically. They are the attempt to explain, to blame the crisis, whatever it is, mass unemployment, unequal incomes, a COVID-19 disaster, whatever it might be, to blame all of the components of the crisis onto something, anything other than the capitalist system, to save capitalism from being blamed so that system change is not what the victims of capitalism focus on. So do we have a white factory worker enraged that his income is not enough to sustain the quality of life, the standard of living that he was told all his life would be his as his American birthright, if only he went to school, as he did, if only he studied hard, as he did, if only he worked hard, as he did, if only he developed his household and his family in the good old Christian tradition. He did. But he still didn't get it. His life is falling apart. He can't stand the level of debt he lives with. He cannot see a future for the job he has, and even less for the children to have a decent job and decent income. He's very upset, and there are millions like him, and among women as well, and among non-whites as well. They're upset, very upset. But in their upset, they are also linked in a variety of ways to institutions that have helped them focus away from capitalism as a source of problems. Maybe it's been an evangelical church that has focused them elsewhere. Maybe it has been a racial consciousness that somehow being white is a significant identity that you can cleave to, even if your position as a worker is hurting your feelings and your sense of self-esteem. Whatever it may be, there are people who are vulnerable to turning their victimization by capitalism into a hostility to other targets that get blamed for their difficulty so that capitalism isn't blamed for their difficulty. When that gets to be very extreme, this process of scapegoating others than capitalism, you have a system called fascism. In fascism, the crises of capitalism are blamed on a quite typical set of scapegoats. You see, it isn't capitalism the fascists explain. Not at all. It is immigrants. It is foreigners. It is evil minorities. It is conspiracies to take away what you have lost under capitalism. And in a good, well-developed fascism, all of these arguments coalesce in a powerful leader who brings all of the scapegoats together as targets, and then, like a medieval knight, tilts with his lance against all of them, promising that the solution to making society what it once was in reality or fantasy is going to be the happy outcome if only the fascist leader is given the power to carry out the repulsion of all the scapegoats that he says will solve our problems. That's what Trump was. He didn't invent any of this. He clearly lacks the capacity. Fascism found him as the tool to try again to save a crisis-ridden capitalism. And boy, do we live in one. From suffering system change through an alliance of its victims and its critics. Capitalism has always produced wealth at one end, poverty at the other. Socialists who want to go beyond capitalism at one end, and fascists who want at all costs to hold on to it. Of course, the people who run the system prefer the right to the left. They can live with that, and they do share the commitment to capitalism. And therein lies the problem. If Mr. Biden's new administration does not deal with all of the victims of capitalism in the United States today, and they are a huge, complex set of communities, then the anger and the bitterness will continue. And the audience for socialists, yes, on the one hand, but likewise for fascists, and they have more going for them in the history of this country than the socialists do for all of the obvious reasons. Those will continue as well. What happened in the Capitol on January 6th is either the culmination of a fascist effort that didn't work, or it's merely a stepping stone. Lessons learned, the fascism is still there. Will they learn and do it better next time? That depends on them, but even more on whether the fundamental problems of capitalism are addressed at a time when the U.S. capitalist empire is clearly declining. These are the challenges and the lessons of the Trump years, and they better be learned. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.